Please join me in welcoming a true hero, Boston College's Liz McCartney.
How's everybody doing? Good. Thank you for coming out today. I really am excited that you're all here, and I'm excited to talk to you about my experiences with the project. But first, let me start by saying this. I am just like you guys. You know, I graduated from BC in 1994, and I wish that I could tell you that I was the star of my class, or that I worked really hard when I was here, or that I took advantage of all of the opportunities like you all are doing just by coming out for a lecture. But the reality is that I wasn't. You know, I was pretty average. In fact, some would argue that I was sub-average. So as you listen to my talk today, I hope that there are a few things that you will carry with you. One is that becoming a leader and figuring out what you want to do in life is a process. And we don't all wake up one morning and say, I get it. It builds on experiences that you have, and over time, you figure those things out. Some people are really lucky, and they know it from the jump. The rest of us kind of have to muddle through it for a little while to figure out who we are, what's important to us, and how we can either make a difference in the world or leave a lasting mark in the world. So I start with those comments because I really want you all to understand that when I was here, I was not in any way, shape, or form exceptional. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about my talk. So I want to talk to you about why we went to New Orleans and what we saw, why we decided to get involved and who we help, and a little bit about some of the things that we learned about being a leader through our experiences down in post-Katrina New Orleans. And so the goal of my talk, hopefully, is to tell the story of the St. Bernard Project and our clients that we're trying to help, and also highlight some things along the way that we have learned that I want to share with you that hopefully you'll take with you in your leadership roles or as you become leaders in your community. So let's go ahead and get into it. You all know what happened on August 29th, 2005. Hurricane Katrina is the worst disaster in U.S. history. Not natural disaster, but disaster. These are images that you've all seen before. In the community where we work in St. Bernard, which is just east of the lower 9th Ward, there was somewhere between 7 and 20 feet of water for 2 to 4 weeks. In many ways, the community where we work is similar to a lot of communities in Boston. Working class, middle class families who, before the storm, were doing fine. Totally self-sufficient, worked hard, paid their taxes, and had essentially done everything right. But the storm came through and literally washed that all away. And when the water receded, this is what was left. This is a photograph from about 4 months after Katrina in the lower 9th Ward. Like you saw in the video, when Zach, who's my boyfriend, and I went down to New Orleans to volunteer, my mom came and joined us for a little while too. We were totally unprepared for what we saw. You know, I was expecting 6 months after the storm to see all signs of progress, you know, to see work trucks, to see things under construction, and when we got there, this is what we saw. Houses on top of cars, cars on top of houses. It was a mess. It looked like the storm had just blown through a few days beforehand. But I think the thing that really surprised me was to meet people from the community who, like I said before, were self-sufficient and they were doing okay. You know, these were people who had owned their house. I met cops and teachers. I met people who had professional careers, who 6 months after the storm, when I met them, were homeless. There was no plan to get them back in their house. And I think the worst part of it was that they had to wait in line for food. There wasn't even a place in their community where they could go grocery shopping or go have a meal. Instead, they had to wait in line at a place where we were giving out free meals. And during that initial month that I was down there, I met a lot of people, but one person's story really stuck out for me. And his name is Mr. Andre. He, at the time, was about 82. And he was one of those guys who would wear the caps with all the pins on them. You know what I'm talking about? And he had a pin for every war that he'd served in. We joked that there was one for the Civil War. I mean, this guy was old, okay? And we became friends. And eventually, you know, he stubbornly would go through the lunch line with his walker and his tray, and by the time he got to the table, half the stuff would be spilled over and on the floor. And eventually, he let me carry his tray, and he was really proud and wanted to be able to take care of himself. And we would have these long conversations at lunchtime. And he mostly did the talking, and I mostly did the listening. And I learned a lot about him and his life and his family. And one day, I sat down, and he started talking. And he started to tell me about, he started to draw a parallel between what happened in Germany right before World War II and what was happening in his country. And there's no way to compare the two things at all. But the point that he was making was people knew that something was wrong. They knew that there was a problem. And in Germany, he felt like people turned their backs on the Jews and almost pretended the problem didn't exist. And he felt like in post-Katrina New Orleans, people had turned their back on people from New Orleans and pretended the problem didn't exist. And he said, you know, they just need to know that we're good people, and we didn't ask for this, and we just need a hand up to get our lives back on track. And then he started to sob. And it's not the kind of sobbing where, you know, you're sad because your pet dies, or you're really traumatized and sad because a parent dies or a grandparent. But he started to cry because he was so hopeless and full of despair that he couldn't, it's like he couldn't even see the next day. And so when Zach and I were having a conversation a few weeks later that started something like this, Zach said, we need to come down and do something. And I said, what are we going to do? We don't know anything. I thought about Mr. Andre, and I thought about the dozens of other people that we had met. And I thought, you know, we can either go home and continue our lives as planned and essentially be a part of the problem, or we can come on back down here and try to do something and be a part of the solution. The other thing that really struck me when we were down there about people like Mr. Andre and Bob, our friend who was a cop, was that when you walked through their homes that had not even been gutted, so not even walking, sort of stumbled through, and when I heard their stories, and they knew we were going back to D.C., and we told them that we were going to come back down, but I think they didn't believe us, because again, they probably thought, what are those two going to do? But you know, they said, we'd say to them, is there anything that we can do for you? And they'd say, just go home and tell the truth. Let people know about our community. Let them know we just want to come home and that we're good people. And I thought, you know, if my universe was turned upside down and the place that I'd called home my whole life was washed away and everybody that I knew and cared about was dispersed across the country, there are a lot of things that I would ask for. A lot of things. None of them probably would be to ask people to go home and tell the truth. So I felt like I was exposed to a different kind of person than I'd learned about in the media when it came to New Orleans. I feel like the media sort of portrayed everybody as lazy and thieves and looking out for kind of themselves. And then when I went down there, I saw something completely different. So I want to show you a couple more images of what we saw. These, again, are photographs that I took when I was down there. And the inside of people's homes. This is as the gutting process was getting started in this house. So Zach and I decided to come on back down, and in the summer of 2006, we said, let's go ahead and do something. And I think back to it now, like I said before, and sort of all joking aside, we really didn't know what we were doing. Zach's an attorney. I studied education at BC and was an elementary school teacher. I don't know anything about disasters. We don't know anything about construction, and I'd never lived in the South. So, you know, in many ways we were grossly underqualified for what we were endeavoring to do. But like Rosa Parks did when she decided to stay seated, we thought, you know, doing something is better than doing nothing at all. And so we started with very little. The slide that you're seeing here is where we are now and what we do in our rebuilding program. But to be clear, when we started, we had 3 volunteers that we found on Craigslist. One of them had just finished her freshman year at Stanford. One of them was her boyfriend, who looked I don't know if I should say this, but he sort of looked like a child molester. Like, he was kind of a weird guy, and he was a math major, nothing against math majors. And then the third guy was a medical student from Saudi Arabia who had like a full mullet and looked exactly like Kirk Cameron. Like, it was just this like, and me and Zach, you know, and we barely knew how to use tools, and we were working on our first client's house. And really, you guys all know the technical term muddling through it. We were the picture of muddling through it in those first couple of weeks and months. And like I said, we didn't know what exactly we were doing, but we knew a few things that we wanted to do. And the first thing that we wanted to do was we wanted results, and we wanted to get people home. And we figured we've got to come across people somewhere along the process who can help teach us and help us grow so that we can achieve results and get people back home. The second thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to treat our clients the way that we'd want somebody to treat our own family members. You know, I told you about Mr. Andre, who I met. Well, I found out a couple months later when I went back to New Orleans that he'd been living in his Ford Ranger pickup truck for 3 months. And every day he would go to FEMA and ask them for a trailer twice a day. And every day they would say no. And I thought, why is it that nobody in FEMA can make the call right now? Like, somebody has to be able to step out of their comfort zone and say, I'm going to get this guy a trailer, even if it means I lose my job. Like, I got to get this guy a trailer. So we felt like we wanted to come back and also treat our clients the way that we'd want somebody to treat our own family members. And maybe if that means breaking the rules a little bit, if that means stepping far outside of our comfort zone to solve problems, we were committed to doing that. And the third thing that we wanted to do was to create an organization where everybody, regardless of whether they looked like Kirk Cameron, regardless of whether they had construction experience, if they were from the States or overseas, regardless of all of that, that they could pitch in and help and be a part of the solution. And so I'm proud to say that as of today, we've been able to develop a model rebuilding program, and you can see up there for about $15,000 to $20,000 worth of building supplies in about 8 to 12 weeks, we can make a family's home livable again. We have these great skilled supervisors who manage all of the volunteers, construction managers who manage that staff, and a whole infrastructure that allows us to utilize between 150 and 250 volunteers every day, working on about 50 clients' homes at a time. And we work in St. Bernard. This summer we started working in Orleans Parish, and again, a parish is another word for county, for those of you who haven't been down to Louisiana. And so our service area is pretty large right now, and we're working on about 50 houses at a time. We focus on people with disabilities, senior citizens, and families with kids, and we really focus on people who don't have enough money to go out and hire a contractor to get the work done. And so what I want to show you, just some images of the work that we do. And all of the people that you're going to see in these photos are either staff, clients working on their house, or volunteers. I think one of the things that is really amazing, you can see sheetrock here in the middle of the room, and these slides will actually take you through the whole process of rebuilding a house. The thing that's so incredible is to see the true, I think, diversity of our volunteers, and that people, regardless of their age, their experience, their gender, anybody can pitch in and help and be a part of the solution. So after we hang the sheetrock, we go through the spackling phase, make the walls all smooth. You can see this guy here on the left in stilts. He's clearly knows what he's doing. And again, you know, young volunteers like this young woman who's 18, who's learning to spackle. And then we put texture on the walls. It actually hides all the mistakes, which we love. More texture. And then we paint everything. This lucky family got a pink bathroom. And then we go through and do all the finishing touches, putting in the floors to make the house really look like a home again. And that's what it looks like when it's all done. So it goes from gutted all the way down to the studs to a livable home again. Again, in about 8 to 12 weeks, we can get a family back in. This is a family's kitchen. We've been able to figure out by using different vendors how to get a kitchen redone for just about $2,000. So all the cabinets and countertops and all that good stuff, it only costs us about $2,000. So this is where we are today. As of today, we've been able to rebuild 245 families' homes. We've had help from 17,000 volunteers. We've got about 50 houses under construction right now, and we've developed this all under one roof model that allows us to rebuild a family's home in about 8 to 12 weeks for about $15,000. And I think one of the things for us that's been really, really important is to look at, for those of, has anybody here ever worked in a disaster area? Okay, I know we have some volunteers that are here. All right. Well, for those of you who don't know, when a community is impacted by a disaster, FEMA says you should form a local long-term recovery committee. And the local long-term recovery committee is made up of all the social service agencies in the area. So the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, whatever faith-based groups are in the area, they all come together, and through a roundtable approach, so everybody sits around a table, they identify who needs help and how they're going to help them. Well, it sounds like a good idea, right? Sort of? Yeah? So the problem, though, is that one group is in charge of finding clients, one group is in charge of volunteers, one group's in charge of funding, one group's in charge of another piece of it, and they're all working together, and nobody's in charge. And so over the last couple of years, I've been to meetings before where case managers will show up and they'll say, we don't have any clients. And I'm like, you don't have any clients? This is New Orleans. There were like 200,000 households that lost their home. How do you not have clients? Or I'd show up at meetings and the funder would say, we want to help that one family. And I actually had a woman, a single mom who lived in a trailer with 5 kids who waited 8 months for the funder to cut the check. And the kicker was that the check wasn't written to the St. Bernard Project. The check was written to the vendor. So we couldn't start working on that client's house until they gave us the check. And so for 8 months, this family had to languish in a FEMA trailer because somebody couldn't figure out how to write a check faster. And so for us at the St. Bernard Project, one of the things that we've tried to do is look at the model that's out there through this local long-term recovery committee and figure out how we can do what that committee is set up to do, but do it all under one roof. And by having an organizational structure and transparency and accountability, we found that we've been able to work a lot faster than the local long-term recovery committee was able to do. Now, as you can imagine, has made us grossly unpopular with some people because we're stepping outside of the norm and how people normally solve problems in this sort of an environment. But I tell you, it's totally worth it. And let me show you how worth it it's been. These are pictures of some of our clients. So this is Leslie and her brother Jojo. She was super excited because we just finished painting her room. Of course, she helped. And she was really excited about how it turned out. Her dad, Joe, is on the left there, and he's on our staff. He manages our warehouse. These 2 girls and their mom lived in a FEMA trailer for about 1.5 years. And for those of you who don't know, a FEMA trailer is probably like the size of this carpet here in the very front that has stripes on it. So it's only about 20 feet wide and maybe about 20 by 10. It's a really small space. So I think about my family that I love dearly. I maybe could do it for a week, maybe a week. These 2 girls, their house, we fixed their house up, and some volunteers, as you can see in the background, decided that they definitely needed princesses in their closet, so they painted a mural on this wall here. Miss Melanie probably looks like a lot of people's grandmother. When we started working on her house, it was gutted all the way down to the studs. And while she couldn't work with our clients, what she did was so typical of people in New Orleans. She fed us really well every day. So she cooked these huge meals, she told people stories, she shared photographs, and this is her and her little pup finally back in their house. A couple more clients here. How cool is that kid's hair? It's pretty awesome, huh? I think he's one of our cutest clients. Mr. Less and his wife are standing in their kitchen. Mr. Less was in the Marines, and he was a high school principal in St. Bernard for about 20 years. His house had between 10 and 12 feet of water in it, and he just didn't get the insurance money. And so we went in with volunteers and rebuilt it, and he and his wife, as you can see, were really happy to almost be back in their house. Now, I realize that there's a fatal flaw to this photograph, and I just want to apologize. Mr. Hampton really is a good guy, even though he's a Yankees fan, so sorry. But this story is really interesting. Mr. Hampton we learned about because he needed a kidney transplant. And he was living in a FEMA trailer at the time, and his doctor said to him, we're not going to do any work, we're not going to operate on you until you get out of the trailer. And the reason they wouldn't operate on him is because if he tried to recover in his FEMA trailer, he would probably end up more sick than he already was, because there's the levels of formaldehyde and other toxic chemicals in the trailers were so unsafe for healthy people that for somebody like him who's really fragile, they said no. So we bumped him up in the queue. We did his house in about 6 weeks, and this is Mr. Hampton, unfortunately wearing Yankees gear, sitting on his fireplace well and just happy to be home again. A couple more clients here. Lisa is a local deputy with the Sheriff's Department. Okay, this is our second cutest client, really. He's back home playing in his bedroom. So just in quick overview, so when we first started, we launched our rebuilding program. Like I said, it's been able to get 245 families back in their homes. But we've done 2 additional things since then. The first is that in February of 2009, we opened up a Center for Wellness and Mental Health. And the reason we did that was because we saw so many of our clients who were suffering. You know, these were people that were alive but not really living, if that makes sense. And so we met person after person who we'd fix up their house and they would almost fall apart. And the process of having to go back home and the vulnerability of living in that community and making the commitment to go back home was often so difficult for people. And it was almost like the rebuilding of their house was the thing that carried them through. And when they got to the finish line, they could finally break down. And so we opened up the clinic in partnership with LSU, and they have a wonderful team of clinicians who right now provide about 60 hours of services for our clients. We have about 125 patients regularly, and the clinic is set up within our office and has its own private entrance. And people are coming, they're coming back, and most importantly, they're getting well. The second thing that we're doing this fall is we're launching a program called Good Work, Good Pay, that's going to hire and train both veterans and other unemployed Louisiana residents to do the rebuilding work. And we're going to be able to pay them living wages and provide them with health benefits because it's not a for-profit entity. So instead of pouring the profits back into the organization, the employees in the program will be able to make more money and have good benefits. So in closing, before we open it up to Q&A, there are a couple things that I want to share, and you heard these sprinkled throughout my talk. And I am by no means an expert on leadership, but the things that I've learned that I want to share with you as you go out into your professional careers or continue them are, one, to do something. You know, be bold, be courageous, do something, because it's always better than doing nothing. The second is, whether you are in social service or whether you're in a for-profit entity or whatever, we always say, you know, you want to treat your clients and your colleagues the way you'd want somebody to treat your own family. The third is making sure that you have a fidelity to results instead of process. I always think of Mr. Andre, and I always think about the 3 months that it took him to get a FEMA trailer. And I think, why couldn't someone just take that bold step and fix the problem? So again, the fidelity to results instead of just process. And then 2 other things that I've found. One is that, this is basic common sense stuff, but it's so important, you got to follow through. If you say you're going to do something, you got to do it. And then the last thing is to listen. You know, I really think that the St. Bernard Project has been as successful at getting families home as we are, and there's certainly a tremendous amount of work to do. In fact, there's still between 6,000 and 8,000 households that need help rebuilding. 6,000 and 8,000 households 4 years later. The only way that organizations grow and that I think change is made is by letting yourself know that you don't have to have all the answers. You know, it's okay to just sit and listen and hear from other people the best way to do it. So with that, I'm going to leave my contact info up here if anybody wants to come down and volunteer, and then open it up to questions.